Welcome to the Thrive TV Show with Lauren Parsons, helping you boost your health, energy, and productivity.
Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Thrive TV Show. I'm Lauren Parsons, your host, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Te Reira, who is the CEO, Chief of Everything at the Radar Foundation. So great to have you with us, Reira.
Thank you. I took a long time trying to figure out what my job title was. You always get asked job titles, and I'm sort of a one-man band. Having said that, my wife also is. So I'm like a one-man band, but my band, I'm like with a drum and a kickbox, and then someone who stands off to the side going, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that?" So that voice of reason is also there. So I'm a very small two-person band.
Yes, and we all need that support crew, don't we? So yeah,
We do.
fantastic. So today we are talking about using humour to tell serious stories, and we're going to talk a bit about the power of humour as a gateway into a story, the importance of humour being inclusive, and also why self-deprecation shouldn't be considered a weakness. So I'm looking forward to hearing your stories, but first I'd love to fire at you some quick-fire this and that questions. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. So tell us, Monopoly or chess?
Monopoly.
Okay, nice. Shower or bath?
Oh, okay. I love a bath. I do like a bath. I have trouble staying in for quite a long time, but my daughter, who is 4.5, even though we've got a water crisis in Auckland, we still do have a bath. Well, she has a bath every night. She's in there for like an hour, and then I bucket the water out. I bought a pump to pump the water outside, but then I never bought a hose. So I've got that's pretty much, if you want to encapsulate the story of my life, it is just a brand new pump sitting in a box without a hose while I continue to bucket water out by hand.
And repurpose the water.
Yeah.
Nice.
Bucketing water, Lauren, is a really important thing. If you've never lived without running water, and you suddenly have to start bucketing water, which I've done on a number of occasions, the value of something that you take for granted, something so easily accessible in most homes in the developed world, becomes really, it has a weight to it. It's
Absolutely.
heavy and it's precious.
Yes, and we are on. We're consuming. This is supposed to be quick fire. Come on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
But we're on tank water as well, so I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Tell me, a month without your car or a month without the internet?
A month without my car.
Yeah, picture that. How could we do this without the internet? Hey, hot drinks
wouldn't it be
or
nice?
cold drinks?
Hot drinks or cold drinks? I'm a hot drink person.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Logical or creative?
Creative.
Obviously. Thought that would be it. Tell me, live-in massage therapist or a live-in chef?
Live-in massage therapist.
Nice. Rome or
you
Paris?
Can cook yourself, but you can't rub yourself.
You can't massage yourself.
Was it Rome or Paris?
Yes, Rome or Paris.
Oh, I got food poisoning in Rome, but I really love Paris. I'm going to say Paris.
Okay.
Paris.
I'll do that. And the final one, mountain or lake?
Mountain.
Okay, nice. You're Maunga.
Yeah.
All right. So in the course of his career, Te Reira has dived with sharks, narrowly avoided a rabbit while racing a Formula 3 car at 200 kilometres an hour, plunged into the frozen Ross Sea in only a skimpy pair of togs, interviewed Yassar Arafat under the watchful eye of gun-toting Palestinian soldiers, been stung in a rather awkward place by a scorpion, and become unofficially New Zealand's worst television gardener. With a string of more official awards to his name, including the country's highest accolades for comedy and television, he's one of New Zealand's most recognised comedians and personalities, and it's such a pleasure to hear your stories today. So tell me about the importance of humour to lead into any story.
Look, it's been something that I've believed in for a really long time. I was always of the belief that humour is a very good gateway into serious topics. And it's probably best exemplified by the fact that ever since I was a kid, I wanted to be a war correspondent. And because I could never understand I could understand the geopolitical nature of conflict, but I couldn't understand how people lived on a day-to-day basis in these particular zones. And so I grew up in the North Waikato on a dairy farm, and I'd be watching Foreign Correspondent. And at the time, in the late 80s, the war in Afghanistan and various other places. And I always wanted them to turn the camera around and show how people just lived and got food and went about their business. And and all of that kind of thing. And so I remember going to sort of telling a lot of people and going to TVNZ and things and saying, I wanted to be New Zealand's first comedy war correspondent. And they, that was pretty much how they responded, Lauren. With that kind of, for those of you who were
Wow,
just
it's kind
listening,
of
Lauren
unique.
gave me
We've
that
heard
kind
of
of,
this before. Yeah.
was it cool? Look, but the humour was never going to be at the expense of the situation, other than sometimes these situations are just ridiculously insane. The humour was going to be at the expense of the fact that I knew I probably wouldn't be a very good war correspondent, and as it turned out, I wasn't. So the humour would come through my ineptitude, and so people would be following this kind of journey, hopefully, and finding the amusement of the fact that I couldn't quite be as adept as they might have expected from an actual professional news reporter. And so you sort of lull them into watching something that they might not otherwise have watched. And so as a result, I ended up, we sort of blagged our way over to East Timor when the conflict started off there early 2000. We went over to Israel and Gaza and places like that. We never got into Gaza. We had an incident at the checkpoint that meant we couldn't get through. But the goal was, that, as I say, there's only so much serious stuff you can watch before it just, people might not want to watch it. And so how do you get people to watch something that they might not want to watch? And then look, through the rest of the career, Off the Radar, which was the big television hit here in New Zealand, back when families sat around on a Sunday night and watched TV, and it was right at the end of those big Sunday night ratings, and it was a family viewing show, sustainable living, all of that kind of thing. But there was a lot of humour in it, and it was never intentional. It was just that I was a bit incompetent. I really am New Zealand's television gardener. And so in a way, if you try to force that humour in, I think humour should be allowed to come naturally, which it does, fortunately for me, by the fact that I'm just a bit incompetent at pretty much everything I want to do. So that's where that gateway comes. And now I'm looking at a lot of stuff, New Zealand history, sustainability, all of the other things. And I think that levity and humour and finding the kind of the irony or satirical nature of situations helps people connect.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it speaks to me, and that it's just making it so much more palatable, isn't it? I mean, facing the situations that people are facing in war-torn countries, and you going in there and just being a down-to-earth bloke, chatting to people and seeing what unfolds. Tell me, what was, perhaps the most interesting, funny, scary moments? Tell us one of the stories from one of those trips.
We had blagged our way into Timor. We'd driven across Australia, myself and a friend of mine, who I had as a cameraman. He wasn't a cameraman. He was a Kontiki tour bus guide. I'd known him for a long time, and I'd convinced him to come with me to Australia. We'd borrowed these home video cameras, and we shot a documentary driving across Australia because we couldn't afford to fly to Darwin, where the flights to Timor were going, thinking that would be the documentary. And then we rang up the UN for a couple of days and pestered them, and suddenly we were on a plane, a Hercules, going into Dili, flying into East Timor, thinking, we hadn't really expected this to happen. So all of this was going on, but probably the most terrifying part was we'd managed to get a press pass, which meant we could go on military aircraft, and we couldn't find the New Zealand troops. Apparently they were someone else. So we're on this little Australian plane, which was literally a Cessna made out of canvas and balsa wood, and the pilots are looking out the window, and the clouds coming in the little valleys, and the mountains are up above you, and the pilot and the co-pilot, we could see them. They were only a couple of meters away from us, and Aaron was filming them at the time, and they were looking out the window, becoming really concerned. And as the cloud came down, you could see the troops. There was half a dozen sort of troops and some NGO people on the plane. They were going, "Oh, this is," he said, "Oh no, I've come all the way, and we're going to have this plane accident." And the pilot's looking at the map, and he's looking back up out the window and looking back at the map. And then the other, must have been the pilot or the co-pilot, looked at his map, took it, and then he turned it upside down the other way. And they went, "Oh, there we are." And they thumbs up to everyone in the back, and on we flew. And I have this moment thinking, I'd come all this way, and then to have, been involved in some kind of air accident because some Royal Australian Air Force pilots had the map upside down. And so that's the kind of thing we put in to the documentary. You might not have stuff like that in a normal documentary about Timor, but we put all of that kind of, I'm a big fan of showing the mechanisms and the behind the scenes of how things happen to take people on that journey with you.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, because people want to picture that they're there and hear all those highs and lows and those funny moments, don't they? Now, I know that you said that it's really important to you that all humour is inclusive. So tell me a bit more about that.
It's really about the target of humor. A lot of my target is myself, and I'm, we'll talk about this later on. That self-deprecating kind of humor, that inability to be not afraid, or the ability to not be afraid of making a fool of yourself, to relax people. But I do a lot of corporate events, a lot of awards nights, and all of that. And people say, "Oh, you could, it's accountants. You can say some jokes about accountants." I say, "No, I don't. I don't want to say. I don't mock. I don't." Never ever really mock anyone's profession when I turn up at their event, because I'm pretty sure they've heard all the jokes, and I find it disrespectful when people
Absolutely.
mock anything that I do. I go, oh, really? Like, that seems an easy target. Is there nothing else? And so it's important that you pay attention to who is in the room, and particularly if you're telling factual stories, that you're aware of where the target of the humor is. Are you punching up or punching down? That's been a real thing in comedy in the last few years.
Yeah.
The notion of punching up, or punching down. Punching down is easy. It's easy to target humor at people who uh, are victims in some way. And humor works the best when it is that sort of court jester, which is, humor has been a tradition and sort of
For
popping the
centuries.
balloons of bureaucracy and whatnot for generations, centuries, thousands of years. There's always been a jester around. So that ability to sort of poke the humor up at a target as opposed to sort of going down. Um, I'm also a big fan of people being able to watch you intergenerationally as well, so that you can sit with your grandchildren and your grandparents and come to one of my shows or watch one of my shows, and there's nothing in that you think, oh, I don't really want the kids to hear that, or the grandparents go, oh, I don't really understand. There's always going to be something they don't really understand at either end, but you want them to. I like family entertainment.
Mm,
I think family entertainment is an undervalued kind of thing now, and particularly now that
yes,
everyone can watch something else. You can have 5 people
exactly.
in a house, and everyone is
Totally.
watching something different.
Totally
So
agree.
I
And
like
that,
it.
trying to create that social connection where families can come together, like what you mentioned of like, back in the good old days, if we call them that, but when we used to actually wait for that program to come on and then watch it at a scheduled time together. So tell us a bit about your family. You mentioned your daughter's 4.5.
Yes, yes, she is. Mostly, although every day she seems it's my birthday today, and today I'm 17.
All
I'm
right.
20, and I'm at university now. I learned that at university. So she's either another age or an entirely different species. I'm a dog today. So and she's been great. We were late parents. We didn't really think we wanted to kind of have kids. It wasn't something that struck me. I remember once I said to my mum, "I don't think I really want to have kids," and she said, "That is the most selfish thing I've ever heard you say," which
Wow.
would be, both true and it did make me think for quite a period of time. So yeah, it's amazing to have a
Mm,
little kid running around. Totally changes
mm,
everything. Your conception of time and reasons for doing things. My wife, who is she's a creative as well.
mhm.
She's a particularly my line of work. Like, I do a lot of historical, I write a lot of shows about history and factual things, and to be able to have someone who can sit down with a page of notes and find the thing in it that's funny. It's not a skill that everybody has. I'm constantly getting sent stuff from clients. They'll say, "Hey, we've got this thing we want you to talk about. Here's all these funny things from our archives or from our notes." And generally, you look at them and go, "That, there's nothing
Not going to work.
really." And actually, the little funny thing is, it could be just one line where someone says, "What happens there?" It's like having a good investigator who has a nose for where the kind of humor is, where the question lies at the heart of things, and also has that ability to say, "That's not funny," or "Have you considered
Mm.
this?" or discusses that meta narrative. So we do work pretty well together, even though as a kind of a comedian, I'm incredibly self-centered and narcissistic and like everyone to think that it's spontaneous and I came up with it all myself.
There
But
you are being self-deprecating again.
it's got me a long way, and it's probably the classic thing of humor aimed at yourself to diffuse the
Mm,
bullies of boarding school. I was a small, very ginger kid, so where humor comes from. But I think that self-deprecating thing, um, Lauren, particularly when you're in a position of authority, if you're hosting an event or if you're coming up
mhm.
to tell people about something that you think they should be concerned about, if you're going to be bringing humor into it, you kind of need to be undercutting yourself at times. It doesn't,
Yeah.
not to diminish your authority or your status, but just to say, hey, you know what, I'm not up on this pedestal. If I'm going to make fun of other people, I'm prepared to make fun, at myself as well. And
Mhm.
hence, I do say I'm the country's worst television gardener, which is probably A, self-deprecating, and B, well, it's also true, because everything I planted in my 13-week series of living sustainably died.
But then in saying that, in that one sentence, you're being humble and relatable and authentic and real. And that's why when you're in a room, like you say, when you're pointing humour at someone, the only real safe person in the room to point humour at is yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot we can learn. It's great
Yeah.
watching you and seeing how that evolves and how, as you say, that's allowed you to tell these really important stories.
Yeah. And I think it's important because we went through a big era. I call it the myth of the television gardener, and you can extend it out, where people would be watching programs on cooking, on gardening, on sustainability, on renovations, whatever it may be. And the host or the people on the program, they would throw seeds into the air, and you would come back after the commercial break and there was a veritable Garden of Eden. Now, I don't know if that's happened to you, but I know it hasn't happened to a lot of people. Like, my mum is an amazing gardener, but it's hard. Gardening is hard. Producing food is hard. And so this myth that it's really easy to do, I think is detrimental. And so I've had so many people come up to me and say, you know what, before I saw your program, I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I just couldn't do this thing. And then suddenly, that actually it is really hard. And I think particularly in food production, it's not easy to grow a broccoli. Things take time. I remember buying a packet of seeds, and it was going to be 100 days before I could have a leek. And I went, I quite like leeks, but 100 days is 3.5 months. I don't
Yeah.
know if I want
It's
to wait.
amazing though, going back to those skills, I just take my hat off to you. I think that, the sustainability, that the benefit for families for generations to be able to reconnect with some of those skills of actually
Yeah.
being able to produce our own food is, we could talk probably for days about that because there's huge, huge value. And I like what you say about making it relatable and actually so much more encouraging for people to see the reality that's not perfect. I think we're seeing a lot of that on social media when we look at other people's, we look at people's feeds and we see these filtered photos of only the highlight reel, and we know that that's having huge impact on people's mental health and well-being. So I think it's in a similar way, you're actually creating some authentic and real messages out there that are really encouraging people.
Yeah, I did a lot of reading, particularly through the lockdown, on people writing around the fact that don't look at what other people are achieving. They're writing their novels and they're learning the piano and they've redecorated a room. You just do you. And there was a woman who'd spent a lot of time in disaster areas, war zones, weather events, earthquakes, all of that kind of thing. And her big thing was, you said, you need to get you and your nest sorted out, because you don't know how long this is going to go for. And if you suddenly launch into all of these things, you'll get to a point where suddenly you don't have your personal familial security sorted out. You you haven't feathered your sort of nest and made it warm and comfortable. So, if that is what is going to get you through, do that, and just ignore all of these people who say that they're writing a novel while learning the piano and a third language.
Yeah, it's certainly, there have been stories. I know there have been some people that have just loved the lockdown period and have gotten so much out of it. And I think we've all got things that we can be thankful for. But I think the majority of people, and certainly, I've got clients that are business owners who are, for example, in tourism. And when people talk to them and say, "Oh, I love lockdown. It was so amazing. I had all this time." But they've actually had to say, "Well, that's really awesome, and I really respect, and I'm happy for you that you had a great time. But for me, it was devastating, and we had to lay off half our staff, and it's been life-changing. And I'm just trying to get through and not, get through a night and get some sleep."
Yeah.
So I think that the good thing for us all to bear in mind, whenever you're listening to this post-lockdown, as we head through recovery, is that everyone is, we're all in the same boat, trying to paddle in the same direction, but everyone's boat is different and everyone's had a different experience. And that's why kindness is one of my most highest values, because I think you never know the battle that someone is fighting. You never know what someone's gone through in a moment in their day. So the more we can show that kindness, the better. Yeah,
And
so
it's
tell me a bit
interesting,
about,
Lauren.
I was going to ask you, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, I'm curious to ask you around the pushback to the kindness message, because we've seen that coming out
Ah,
recently where people are saying, the last thing I want to see is a sign on a motorway overbridge saying "Be kind." Isn't it
mm,
interesting where suddenly, when does something that seems inherently the right thing to do suddenly become something that people find intrusive,
mm.
offensive? Do you know what I mean? Have you seen
Yeah,
that?
I do. I didn't know there's the pushback, but I have heard a few people talking about, I think it relates to the fact that people just, at the end of the day, some people just do not want to be told how to act, how to be. And I can totally understand and respect that. And at the same time, for me, because kindness is one of my top values, whether it's, with my kids' team sports, whether they're at school, whether it's speaking to someone in the shop, I just feel like if we could all just actually literally be a
Mm,
little more kind, that it would, it would change the world.
yeah, yeah.
But I can totally respect and understand that people don't always like receiving that message, and maybe they're not in the right headspace to take it on board. And I respect that too. Yeah, I was going to ask you, what are some of your top values?
Oh,
Hmm.
oh, this is a
Deep question, I
this is
know,
a
but I
good,
want to
a
get to
deep
know
and challenging
you.
question. What are my top value? Oh, I could point out all of my flaws. Values. I think honesty. Honesty is important. A sense of humor, I think, is an important value. The ability to particularly look at yourself and laugh when things go wrong, rather than just becoming angry about it, which is often
Yeah.
easier said than done.
Yes.
Kindness, and I think increasingly an understanding of your position in the world, particularly if you've got a lot of privilege. I remember when the whole
Mm,
thing, check your privilege, came out,
mhm.
18 months, 2 years ago, it really started to sort of make itself manifest in social media and things like that. And you went, wait, wow, what's this all about? And then suddenly to be able
Yes.
to look at yourself through that lens, I think, I don't know if that's technically a value, but I think it's definitely a life skill that you need to be able to do. As you were saying,
Mm,
to recognize that not everyone had the same experience in lockdown, and you never know what that kind of experience has been, and to be able to look into someone else and go, I can understand why you're angry about that, or why you've got this particular message.
mm,
So what's it? And I'm a people person. One of my values is just smiling and talking to people.
yeah.
There is not. I'm appalling. Do not go to a farmer's market or indeed anywhere with me, because particularly if you've got a little deadline, you're going, we're supposed to be meeting friends in the near future. Like, I quite like being punctual, but I can't help but talk to people.
Mhm.
Um, it's just this sort of, it's just the way I am. I find people absolutely fascinating. So I guess as a value, curiosity. Does that count?
Nice.
I haven't got
Yes.
a
Yeah.
list of values. What
No,
what
no.
constitutes a value? But curiosity about everything, about people, about the world around you,
Mm,
about things that you may find uncomfortable. To go deeper into those and go, why is this making me uncomfortable? Is it because I don't understand it? Is it because this is actually something that should make me uncomfortable? So yeah, curiosity.
mhm.
Curiosity has got me probably to where I am today, and also a sense
Great.
that just do it. If you want to do something, just do it. Don't let the
Mm,
naysayers say that you can't.
nice. Yes, I love that. And I think there'll be people listening in that will be really encouraged by that, going, yes, yep, just do it. Love it. So tell me, in our last few minutes here, what are some of the serious stories, or is there one of the key serious stories that you're wanting to get out there that you want to highlight for people listening in?
Yeah, I've done a lot of New Zealand history shows and things like that, but I've for probably, oh gosh, it must have been nearly 15 or more years. I worked on a show called Welcome to King Country with Mike King,
Hmm.
around some aspects of New Zealand history, and then I've worked on some other shows, and I've just been really fascinated with the New Zealand wars, the colonial land wars, and all of the stories that happened and the characters. And so I say for 15 years I've been working on this show, but really I've just been thinking about working on the show. And I want to tell these stories because what I do, my work is not a definitive history of anything. My work is a gateway, particularly using humor. It's a gateway to bring people into something that they might not know much about, and then hopefully they will finish the program, the podcast, the stage show and whatnot, and then go away and find out some more. So I'm really wanting to just knuckle down and get this New Zealand history, New Zealand War story told. And the whole thing is based on a letter that Titoka Wadu wrote down in Taranaki, and Titoka Wadu himself, this incredible character who went from a man of peace through into one of the kind of most revered Maori generals, whose strategy was incredible, and then for it to all sort of fall apart in the way it did. But he wrote this phenomenal letter, that 256 words long letter, that I think is one of the greatest documents ever written in the history of the country, when he basically tells the British that he says, I have eaten the flesh of man, my throat is open to the flesh of man, the women have dined on it, do not travel on these roads or you will be your bodies will be left for the birds and nature, and we'll eat you as well. Why it was written and how it was written, but the language, and he was a religious scholar in a way. He'd come up all the way through the church. He knew all about metaphor and linguistics and this combining of European and Maori belief, this moment in time where he knew that everything was on the line for his people in Taranaki, and that the time of peace had finished. I just find the whole time so fascinating and so complicated, but it's the stories of people. History is always the stories of people, and to sort of tell some of these stories and try to say this sort of happened because of this, and to encourage people to delve deeper into it in a way to understand why things that are coming to the fore now are important, why we're discussing renaming roads, why people find statues offensive, all of these little things. There's a reason for that. If we don't understand what that is, so I want to tell these stories, because they're great stories, the equal of any of the overseas stories, but because they're ours and they happen in our landscape. And when you can put stories into landscape, suddenly that land and that landscape and the waterways and the weather, everything is different.
Wonderful. Oh, I look forward to hearing and seeing that evolve and seeing those stories come out. Very exciting. So if people wanted to get in touch with you or find out more or follow you, what's the best way to do that, Radar?
Look, probably I'm notoriously bad at returning emails. I do return them. People can email me through my website. I made it really simple when I came up with the website. It's radarswebsite.com. They can go through there. Pretty easy. Facebook, messages off through Facebook, Twitter. Send a letter. Letter writing is an important thing.
Send a gift. No, it is. I agree.
You still handwrite letters?
I do actually. I'm just going to show you. I have cards.
Oh, wow.
I got out a card, and I've got someone I need to write a card to, but I don't have their address because it's not in their email signature. So I'm going to have to hunt it down. And I do like writing cards every week.
Take a photo and send a PDF of the card. But how important are these talismans that you can, a physical thing that you can hold in your hand? You put it on your shelf, you put it away, and 7 years later you pull out a card or a photo or something, and particularly in a digital world. We're so new to the digital world. This is 5 or 10 years really we've been in it. We could talk for another hour about the important letters and photos, but
exactly. I mean, just think how lovely it is to get an envelope that's actually got handwriting on it, and then something personal is amazing. Amazing. We could talk forever.
We will, but the final thing I was going to say about something like a letter, you tell people different things in a letter than you do in an email. It's an entirely different way of connecting. So maybe if anything, if we've got this thing of kindness, let's all start writing cards, thank you cards, a little bit of that lost etiquette, but just to reconnect with people.
Yes, I love that. We'll reinstitute the pen pals,
Yeah.
The old.
People can contact me only through fax.
I'm sorry, the 1980s phoned and they want their faxes back. Okay, fantastic. Hey, one final question before we wrap up. I'll just say as well, make sure that you head to the thrivetvshow.com, and all of the links to connect with Radar will be down below, as well as all the other inspiring episodes. So the thrivetvshow.com. But to wrap up, Radar, I just would love your final word. What's one final thing you'd love to share with everyone that's listening in today?
Oh gosh.
No pressure.
One thing I like to share, I've liked the kind of the intrusiveness that we've experienced over the lockdown period of seeing people in their own spaces. Like, as I say, I'm curious about people. I've got my garage. This is literally where I am. For anyone who's watching this, that shambles, it looks appalling in that photo. It looks as if I'm living in a place that's gradually being overgrown by bamboo and an apple tree and various other things. I like that ability to see into people's worlds. So if you can do that, I think that's an interesting way of getting a sense of who people really are outside of their kind of the facade of their outer personality, if you know what I mean. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, to me, that just speaks to that authenticity, being authentic, being real. And it's been lovely actually connecting with people. I've done quite a few recordings through the lockdown, and now we are post-lockdown, a bit more freedom, but heading through what will be, I think, a long period of recovery, and it'll be a marathon, not a sprint. But if we could all go out and write some more letters, share kindness, use humour, share stories, we will get through it together. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, sharing your stories, and entertaining us. And,
thanks for having me, Lauren, and thank you for going out there and doing all that wonderful work to remind people about, kindness and everything is all well. But I sat through your session the other day, and the person we often need to be most kind to is ourselves, and that can be the most difficult part actually, to remind ourselves that we're okay and we need to look after ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Very good. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. That has been another episode of the Thrive TV show. Go out and thrive.
Thank you for listening to the Thrive TV show with Lauren Parsons. Visit thrivetvshow.com to access the show notes and discover our fantastic bonus content. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring episode.